For 3 years, the richest men in the world have told a consistent story. Human labor is obsolete. The white-collar workforce is a rounding error away from extinction.
But what to do about mass unemployment? This is going to be a massive social challenge. There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better. And I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income.
And the fastest way to prove you understood the future was to fire the people who built your company and replace them with a chatbot. That story sold. It moved stock prices, justified layoffs, and gave boards permission to cut headcount without ever having to say the word cost. Every earnings call for the last 3 years has had some version of the same slide. Fewer people, more efficiency, a chart pointing up and to the right, and a single word doing all the explanatory work. AI. But 3 years in, a strange thing is happening in the data. The companies that ran this experiment first, the ones held up as proof that the future had already arrived, are now the companies quietly reversing course. Not because they changed their minds about AI as a technology, because AI did not do what they told employees, customers, and investors it would do. And when you actually line up what was promised against what happened inside the same companies, the pattern is not subtle. If one company became the poster child for AI replacing human labor, it was Klarna. In early 2024, the Swedish financial technology company announced its assistant, built with OpenAI, was doing the work of 700 customer service agents in its first month alone, cutting resolution time from 11 minutes down to under 2. The chief executive went on record saying AI could already do every job a human at Klarna could do. It became the most cited case study in the entire argument that AI replaces labor.
Due to the implications of AI, since September, October, we have stopped recruitment. And in our case, with normal attrition rates that most tech companies have, where people stay about 5 years, this means that we are actually shrinking in number of employees by about 20% per year.
By early this year, Klarna was quietly hiring humans back, not a handful. An ongoing recruitment drive aimed at rebuilding the human support layer the company had spent 2 years dismantling. In an interview with Bloomberg, the chief executive explained that the company had focused too much on cost and not enough on quality, and that customers consistently wanted the option of reaching an actual person. The rehiring effort is now the case study everyone in Enterprise AI points to, just for the opposite lesson than the one Klarna intended to teach. And Klarna was not alone in reaching for AI as a headline, reason to cut staff either. Salesforce trimmed thousands of positions the same year, citing what it called the benefits and efficiencies of AI.
Well, I think I just had a meeting, coming from a meeting with my head of engineering, and we're looking at productivity levels of 30 to 50% this year in key functions like engineering, coding, support,
You're saying
service.
AI is doing 30 to 50% of the work?
AI is doing 30 to 50% of the work at Salesforce now.
The framing was almost identical everywhere you looked. A generative model gets announced, a round of layoffs follows within months, and the press release links the two directly, as if the model had already proven it could do the job rather than merely promise to. Klarna was not an outlier, it was a preview. Ford is now reportedly rehiring hundreds of experienced engineers specifically to fix quality problems that automated systems could not catch. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia reversed 45 customer service layoffs after admitting, in its own words, that its assessment of which roles were unnecessary did not adequately consider the full picture. The bank employee union called the reversal a massive win for workers. IBM handed its own human resources function to an AI assistant that could resolve 94% of routine requests. Then it discovered the remaining 6% were exactly the cases that required judgment, which is to say, the cases that actually needed a person. IBM did not just patch the problem. It announced plans to triple entry-level hiring across the company this year, with its own chief human resources officer warning that without that pipeline, in 3 to 5 years, there is no experienced workforce left to draw from at all. This is not anecdotal anymore. According to Forrester Research, 55% of employers now regret the layoffs they attributed to AI. And according to Gartner, half of all companies that blamed AI for their headcount cuts are expected to be rehiring for similar roles by 2027. Analysts have started calling this pattern the AI layoff boomerang. And one detail keeps showing up across nearly every case. The rehiring almost always costs more than the original layoff ever saved, because a company is not just replacing a headcount number. It is trying to replace institutional knowledge that already walked out the door. The explanation industry analysts keep landing on is not that the underlying technology is fake. It is that a hybrid approach, where AI handles the routine, high volume work, and a person handles everything with nuance, consistently performs better than trying to remove the person entirely. That is a genuinely useful finding. It is also a much smaller and much less exciting claim than the one that got sold to investors and to boards over the last 3 years, which is exactly why so few companies are eager to say it out loud. Notice the shape of the pattern across every single one of these companies. Announce the cut, credit the model, wait somewhere between 6 months and 2 years, then quietly reopen a version of the same job under a slightly different title, usually remote, usually contract, usually at a lower rate than the person who originally held it. None of these companies are calling this what it looks like from the outside, which is a very expensive way to learn something that the workers who were let go probably could have told them for free. Here is what makes this more than a string of embarrassing headlines. Some of the same executives blaming AI for layoffs have, in the same breath, admitted it is not actually AI doing the replacing. Months earlier, in an internal email with the subject line, "Some thoughts on generative AI," the chief executive of Amazon had already told employees the company would need fewer people doing some of the jobs being done today, and that he expected this to shrink the total corporate workforce within a few years, as the company found efficiency gains from using AI extensively. That was the setup. When Amazon then cut 14,000 corporate jobs, the senior vice president who announced the decision wrote in an official company blog post that AI is, quote, "the most transformative technology we have seen since the internet," end quote, and that the company needed fewer layers to move quickly. 2 days later, on the company earnings call, the very same chief executive told analysts the layoffs were not really financially driven, and in his own words, not really AI driven either, not right now. 3 separate statements from the top of the same company, inside the same year, and by the third one, the AI explanation had quietly disappeared. That contradiction is the tell. AI is not the reason for the cuts. It is the cover story for the cuts, and even the company saying it does not seem fully committed to the cover story once the cameras move on. If you want the physical, visible version of this same pattern, look at self-driving robo-taxis. A year ago, the promise was fleets of autonomous vehicles replacing human drivers at scale within months. 500 vehicles in one city by the end of last year. Coverage for half the population of the United States. Fully unsupervised rides. Expansion to 8 to 10 cities. Today, a full year into the flagship robo-taxi program, the operational fleet in its home city has shrunk to roughly 20 vehicles. The next 2 cities it expanded into have seen almost no growth at all, stuck at just 3 and 6 vehicles since launch. Meanwhile, a competitor running the same basic service, with the same basic promise, is operating a fleet many times larger in the very same state, without a single splashy keynote to do it. That competitor now runs thousands of vehicles nationwide and handles hundreds of thousands of paid rides every single week, quietly, while the flagship program keeps tying its next real expansion to a software rewrite that has already slipped past its own original timeline. The gap between the announcement and the actual cars on the road, a full year later, is the same gap you see in every one of these stories. The demo was real, the promise was not. None of this cost the people who made the decision anything. The employees who were laid off lost income and benefits. In some cases lost health coverage in the middle of it, and in many cases had to be recruited back on worse terms than before, often as remote or contract roles instead of the positions they originally held. Think about what that actually means for the person living through it. You are told your job no longer exists because a model can do it better. You leave. The model cannot in fact do it. And a year later, you are invited to reapply for a version of the same role at a lower rate, with less security, and with the company describing the whole thing as an exciting, new flexible staffing model, rather than what it plainly was, which is a mistake that someone else made and you paid for. The company's absorbed a different kind of cost. Severance, then the cost of rehiring, then the cost of losing customers and institutional knowledge somewhere in between, then the reputational cost of quietly walking the story back once the press stopped paying attention. The executives who greenlit the cuts kept their compensation, kept their headlines about transformation, and in most cases have never had to publicly account for how much of the savings they promised investors actually showed up. There is no earnings call slide titled, "Here is what that layoff actually cost us to undo." That asymmetry is the real story here, not that AI is useless. Plenty of narrow specific uses of it work perfectly fine. The story is that a small number of extremely wealthy decision makers ran a live experiment on other people's livelihoods, based on a claim about AI capability that their own operating data did not support. And when the experiment failed, the bill went to the workers who got cut and the customers who got worse service, never to the people who made the call in the first place. Decades ago, when a very similar wave of AI hype collapsed, the companies and the government funding them quietly walked away and absorbed the loss, and the workforce that had been promised a revolution picked up the pieces of a broken hype cycle instead. This time the stakes are bigger. The companies involved make up a larger share of the stock market than at any point in history, and the money riding on this bet is not just corporate money anymore. It is retirement accounts, index funds, and household savings, all tied to whether a handful of companies can eventually make good on a claim their own operating results have not supported yet. Klarna, IBM, Ford, and Amazon are not fringe examples. They are the companies that move first and loudest, the ones held up in keynote after keynote as proof the future had already arrived, which makes them the clearest evidence of what actually happens when the rest of the market rushes to catch up to a promise that was never fully tested before it was sold. The technology may still mature. The narrow specific uses that already work will likely keep working. But the sweeping version of the promise, the one used to justify firing real people with real families and real bills, is the part that is failing in public. One quiet rehiring announcement at a time. If this channel is giving you a version of this story that you are not getting anywhere else, the best thing you can do is like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps get this in front of more people who are trying to understand what is actually happening instead of what they are being told is happening. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.